Welcome to Canadian Culture Club Video 1. In today's episode, I, your host Emma, will be sharing with you the basics of the education system across Canada. If you are preparing for a move to Canada or thinking about studying or working here, then please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Canadian Culture Club, and also our podcast, which you can find on any podcast app. All the links to both will be in the description of this episode. Today, I'm going to share some information about our education system here in Canada. Ever since I lived in Spain and was teaching English in a school there, I've been asked about what school is like in my country, whether for little kids or for adults who might be studying abroad. Maybe they are doing an exchange program or becoming an international student at a university here. And we're not really going to go into university in today's episode, but if that's interesting to you, then let me know in the comments below on YouTube. In today's episode, we're going to cover the basics of the primary and secondary school education system. So think about it more or less until 18 years of age. To start off, school is mandatory in most parts of Canada starting at 6 years old. That exact age might change depending on the province or territory. And it's also generally mandatory until 16 years old or 18 years old, again, depending on the province or territory. So more or less, 6 to 16 is a pretty stable guess. The school year. Our school year is generally from September until June. In September, we usually start around Labor Day here in Canada. We share Labor Day the same day with the United States. And we go towards the end of June, particularly for primary school, so the youngest kids. And it might get a little earlier in secondary school, so you might not need to stay as long in June, but it's still the month of June. Then, the best time of year is holiday. So we have the entire month of July and August off pretty much across Canada, and you might have a full week into September depending on when Labor Day falls as well. Other holidays throughout the year are at Christmas, where we usually have 2 weeks off, and March, which is called March break, and we usually have 1 week off. Everyone across the country gets national holidays off, so that could include things like Good Friday, for example. Then every province or territory has its local holidays strewn in throughout the year. It's usually a day here and there, but I would say about 1 day a month. A provincial holiday might be Family Day, for example. In Ontario, my province, we have Family Day in February, and it's not necessarily the case in other provinces. On top of this, students generally get days off once in a while when teachers or other school staff need to do professional development. These are called PD days, professional development days. They're generally put on the school calendar in advance at the beginning of the year so that parents can plan around this and they know what childcare is necessary depending on the time of year. So the school year, September to June, is generally split into 3 parts, which are called terms throughout primary school. Report cards with the child's grades go home at the end of each term. In secondary school, we often switch to dividing the year into 2 parts, which are called semesters. And similarly, we tend to have report cards go home towards the end of each semester. School systems. Now we're going to talk about a really important note, which is that in Canada, we have public schools and we have private schools. Unlike places like Spain, where I've taught before, where semi-private schools that are partially government funded at the primary and secondary level, those are really common there. This is not at all common in Canada. It's generally completely public and completely private until you get up to university level, and we're not talking about that today. Each province and territory has a majority of public schools, and most Canadians go to public school. Most publicly funded schools are secular, but we do also have some faith-based schools that are publicly funded depending on the province. So in 3 provinces and 2 territories, we have faith-based schools that are publicly funded. The provinces are Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and the territories are the Northwest Territories and Yukon. As a resident of one of these provinces or territories, you get to decide where your tax dollars go. You can decide, is it towards the secular system or to the faith-based system? So to give an example of what that really means in action to have secular and faith-based schools, I'll give Ontario as an example. So Ontario actually has 4 school systems. English secular, which is what most people in everyday life use the word public for. If you say to someone from Ontario, I went to public school, they'll probably assume it was an English secular school. We have French secular, We have English Catholic, and we have French Catholic. English secular and English Catholic school boards are the most common across Ontario. English is very dominant in most of Ontario. So English language schools are more common and more accessible to most people in this province. Your ability to go or to send your kids to a French language school, whether secular or Catholic, very much depends on the neighborhood you're in, its proximity to one of these schools, the number of open spots available, whether there's a bus system that can take them there or you can drive a long way. It's just generally not super accessible. Now, the reason we have these 4 kinds of school boards, English secular, English Catholic, French secular, French Catholic, goes into some history of the peoples that were in Ontario, and some other provinces can share a bit of this history too. So, of course, the idea of offering some French schools is to try and make that bilingual vision of Canada a little bit more realistic. Of course, we talked about the accessibility problems before, but in theory, it's to make sure that both official languages are available in the public system. And also, there's history between Protestants and Catholics in Canada, and basically wanting to make sure both groups were included. So it's very much just the secular system, which originally would have been very deeply influenced by Protestantism, but is now completely secular, and the Catholic system, which remains Catholic to this day. On that note, you do not need to be Catholic to go to a Catholic school. Catholic schools do have religion classes, and most people who attend them are Catholic. At least they're culturally Catholic, where it's tradition for their family, even if they're not very proactive or particular believers. But you can also attend these schools if you practice a different religion or you're not religious at all. Some reasons you might choose to go to a Catholic school despite not being Catholic include its proximity to your house, the neighborhood, the school's reputation. For example, I went to public school and not Catholic school, even though my mom's family was Catholic, because the public school was close and the Catholic school was across some train tracks, so it was a little bit riskier for me to go that direction. So I went to public school instead. Catholic schools still have certain secular values and opportunities that they need to abide by. So it's not like you will be imposed on necessarily if you're not Catholic going to one of these schools. But if you are Catholic, it can be a really supportive environment to learn in and to grow in your faith, as well as learning the traditional subjects, let's say. Finally, in all provinces, there's the option of private schools. That is a whole other beast, you might say, and I've never attended a private school myself. Very few people I know have, although I do know a couple. So some private schools here will follow particular educational philosophies. These might include Montessori schools, Waldorf schools, Acton academies. Some support kids with special interests, like elite athletes who need really flexible schedules and perhaps more tutoring time, one-on-one time with their teachers because they can't be in the classroom as much time as other kids. And then of course, there are also private schools that are basically just known for being for the socially elite, of course. So some that come to mind are Havergal, Appleby College, Upper Canada College, and oftentimes they can pay for the best of the best, so they may have better teaching than a public school. It's possible. I think that somewhat depends on the kid. It's somewhat subjective. And there's also rich experiences that come from going to public schools where you have access to people of all different walks of life, all social classes. But in theory, people send their kids to private schools because of good quality education. And in reality, especially with this elite group, it's the social contacts that the kids grow up to have and the opportunities they have waiting for them. Now, every private school sets its own prices, but keep in mind that in Canada, you're talking about thousands of dollars in tuition a year or tens of thousands of dollars in tuition every year. It's very expensive to go to private school. I'll also briefly mention that homeschooling is legal across all of Canada. I believe it was never illegal in Canada, but of course it has different laws and regulations and overseeing bodies depending on the province or territory. So if you're interested in homeschooling specifically, I would look at Canadian websites for the province or territory you're moving to or you've just moved to really understand in detail how the system works. All right, in our next video, we're going to talk about the typical educational journey a Canadian kid will have from the time they're in kindergarten to the time they graduate secondary school. So make sure you're subscribed to the Canadian Culture Club YouTube channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, and the podcast version if you prefer to listen rather than watch your episodes so you don't miss that next episode. And if you're really interested in today's topic, I've put a link to the matching blog post in the description of this episode. I'll link you to some other resources there as well for further reading. Please give this video a like and let me know in the comments. Why are you interested in the Canadian education system? Are you moving here? Are you putting your kid in school here for the first time? Let me know. Thanks for stopping by Canadian Culture Club today. I'll see you next time, eh?